Hey guys, welcome back. If this is your first time here, welcome. This is the Ridgestead, and today we're going to be going over our garage chicken brooder. So tomorrow's going to be a fun day here on the homestead. We get to go pick up our 30 Cornish Cross meat birds, and this is our second time this year we're going to be going through raising them from chicks to butchering. So I figured it was a good time to show our chicken brooder and our current setup. So our brooder is actually just a full sheet of 1/2-inch plywood. It is 96 by 48. And you just cut it down to 2 foot by 4 foot sections, just cutting the width of the board, which runs fairly cheap. I think I paid during COVID times, what was it, 10, 15 bucks for the sheet, which isn't bad at all, especially with having to replace it probably within the next maybe 2 years, depending on how much you use your brooder. So for bedding, I actually like to use aspen wood. It's less dusty. And after finding out it was less dusty, it was a definite yes for me because we had our first round of egg layers in our basement, and we used regular pine bedding, and I didn't know how dusty it was gonna be, and everything had a film on it. It was completely dusted over, and I'm talking everything. Our washer and dryer smelled for a good 2 months. I had to wash loads multiple times to get the stink out of it, and I'll never do that again. So our first round of meat birds, I used this aspen bedding, and it was a night and day difference because even the stuff in the garage might have had a little bit of dust on it. It didn't smell nearly as bad as using pine. Also, talking about dust, you don't want to use cedar because it has more toxins in it, which can lead to a respiratory problem in your chicks. Along with pine bedding, it usually doesn't lead to a problem, but with how dusty it is, it can. And then aspen bedding is going to be the best that you can get off the shelf. And actually you can go a step above that and get hemp bedding, but it's pretty pricey, especially for, I think I got 5 cubic feet of this aspen bedding for $10 just at Walmart. And then if you were to get it out of hemp, you'd be looking at, I think, $20 to $30 a bag, but you're gonna be going through at least 3 bags depending on how much bedding you put in originally and what your plan is for the bedding, which I'll go over that in a second. So with putting in the bedding, when I first get my chicks, I like to stomp it down a whole bunch so it compresses it just enough where the chicks don't have to literally climb through and get to their food or back to the heat lamp or whatever heating element you have in there. I just thought it would be a little bit easier, and then once the chicks get bigger, I can just put it in there and kind of fluff it up and they stomp it all down themselves. So that brings me to the next thing, talking about the tarp that goes underneath our brooder. We like to do the deep litter method for our egg layers and for our chicks because we like to put it into our compost once it's completely soiled and we can reuse it. Also, the tarp is a very easy way to clean it out once you're done with your chicks and they go out into the coop or chicken tractor or whatever you're gonna do with them, because you can just wrap it all up into a ball basically and drag it out of the garage, or I guess you could do this in your basement, but I highly recommend not doing it in your basement. If you have to, I guess you can. But yeah, wrap it up into a ball, drag it out into the garbage or your compost pile, whatever you want to do with it. Next thing after doing your bedding is your heating elements and your waterer and your feeder. When I recommend to set up your chicken brooder, I recommend not the day before like me, but since I already ran through this whole process earlier this spring, I know everything's working and whatnot, and it's pretty easy to set up. I would definitely recommend setting up your brooder at least a week in advance to make sure everything's working, making sure everything can get up to temp depending on what time of the year it is. So like I said earlier, when we had our first batch of Cornish Cross, we were in the 30s still. Some nights were about 20s, so I was really kind of scared that the chicks were gonna get too cold at night, so I had to run out and get another heating pad that they go under that you'll see in a minute. And then I also had to run another heat lamp just to get it up to temp and hold the temp, especially at nighttime. And then once they got a little bit bigger, they were definitely more cold tolerant and worked out pretty well. But yeah, definitely set up at least a week before and make sure everything's square, because you do not want to get your chicks and be running around trying to get something last minute. And like me, I had to run to 3 different stores for that heating element because it was a Sunday afternoon and then the chicks were coming the next day on a Monday. I was really out of luck on that one. So I also like to put in little 2x4s or 2x6s on the bottom of the coop to put my water and feeder on, only because the chicks will get very messy and they'll end up getting food all inside the water and feeder regardless, but it definitely helps a bunch on keeping that clean. And then for heating elements, you can either use regular heat lamp. I try not to do that just because of dust, and we got kids and a cat and all this other stuff, and that's the last thing I need is a fire. So I'd like to use these little heating pads, and the only thing that I could recommend for that is that you can get this little cone that goes on top. It's a little plastic cone and it keeps the chicks from jumping up on top. I currently don't have one of those, and I'm definitely gonna order 2 because the chicks, when they get older, they like to roost on top and get poop all over it, and it's not a lot of fun to scrape off and clean off once the chicks are out of the brooder. But I mean, that's just something extra. If you don't want it, you really don't need it, but it's definitely more convenient on the cleanup. But yeah, you can see how simple this is to set up. Like I said, it's 1 piece of plywood. What I actually do for the top is I grabbed 1x2s and I literally just made a frame all the way around and just did some pocket hole jigs in each corner and just screwed it together, and then just stapled some hardware cloth across the top, and it's kept them in perfectly fine. I've had some try to fly out and you can hear them hitting the top of a gate on top, but definitely holds them. For locking mechanism, I have it right here about, and it's just a little eyelet, and there's just one of those little hooks that you kind of use for a gate or even on maybe your current chicken coop, where you can just hook it on and then that keeps them in. Definitely some pros for this chicken brooder. I like the cost, completely cheap. Definitely cheap to be replaced if you have to do it like every year, depending on how many birds you go through. Or what I have seen a problem is with the waste at the bottom, with them being messy or even going to the bathroom, that it can kind of get saturated into the wood, but it doesn't smell, so that's good. But yeah, it's just not very great looking, but I mean, I'll take the cost over how it looks any day. And then another pro is storage. I keep it up in the rafters, as you saw me taking it down earlier. Once it's done, I literally just hose it all off, I let it dry outside, and then I stack it and then shove it up in my rafters, and it sits there until I do my next batch of birds, or I wait until springtime and we'll get some other egg layers. So there's definitely a lot more pros to this, but I'll be going over those at a later date because I'm going to be making weekly videos on updates for our chicks to see how they progress, and if there's any problems we run into that isn't in a lot of videos that I see, because a lot of people are talking about their chicks right when they get them, but I figured doing a video for a weekly update would be really helpful. For cons, I would say that depending if you have kids, it's not really kid friendly because it definitely splinters a little bit. Staple wise and hardware cloth, it's pretty sharp in some places. I mean, you can definitely clean it up more, but for what it's for, since it's just a chicken brooder, as long as the chicks are safe, I kind of really don't care too much. And I kind of keep the kids away from it regardless, just because I don't want them to be messing with the animals or the electrical and everything. One con I would say is the size. It is 4 foot by 4 foot, 2 foot high, which is pretty big and takes up a quarter of our garage. So we won't be able to park another vehicle in here or do any other projects in here for the time being, which I know some other brooders are pretty slim. You can kind of tuck them up against the wall and everything, but we like the space over the aesthetic, especially with getting 30 birds at a time and maybe even more, maybe our next batch, I'm not entirely sure yet, but that's literally the only cons I could think of with this. Everything else has been super easy with it, and I highly recommend it. Just like how easy the brooder is, that is about how simple and easy this video is gonna be. And like I said before, and if you have any questions or other input on brooders let me know, because I mean, I'm still learning, but with our past experience for the past 3 years, I figured it would be definitely a good idea to spread some knowledge on what we've gone through, and hopefully that helps you out. So yeah, appreciate you for watching, and we'll see you next time.